Hi everyone. It is so difficult to believe that this is our final class together coming up this week. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed getting to know each of you. I've enjoyed hearing your stories and your thoughtfulness and learning more about how you think and your experiences and seeing how you have made sense of the world through stories, which is the purpose of this class too. So thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey and your story in this way. So in this final lecture, I'm going to offer you some words of encouragement about the usefulness and the inherent goodness of writing and storytelling, good for their own sake. I'm going to offer you some practical tips on the process of revising your work. And then we're going to talk a little bit about just some concluding thoughts in preparation for our final class together. So I just want to remind you, no writing is ever wasted. I want to encourage you to keep writing, even beyond this class and even beyond this assignment that this short piece of prose, this short story that you wrote for this class. And I hope that you continue to find writing nourishing for your soul and also useful to your personal and professional lives. Stephen Pressfield, who you might remember from The War of Art, which we read earlier in this course, reminds us that we need to write, we need to create for the love of the art in and of itself. And we cannot be dependent on external successes and what happens outside of us. Only control what we can control, and do it for the love of the craft. Right, to create and enjoy the fullness of our humanity. And the reading for this class is a very practical account for the benefits of storytelling and writing for your professional life in the nonprofit world. And so I hope that you found that useful. I know some of our other texts have been a little bit more theoretical, so I wanted to ground the conversation a little bit. And I want to share with you a story about a time where I thought really deeply about why I was writing. And I was made to question and kind of come to terms with why I did what I did, why I loved what I loved, why I cared about these things. This was a number of years ago, and it was in the wake of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade's suicides, and they were in the same week. And the world was just floored. We collectively just shock and horror, and couldn't believe that people who are so successful and seemingly had everything that the world could offer, fame, money, prestige, accomplishment, they were at the top of the success hierarchy of their respective fields. And why on earth would make them want to take their life? We were just kind of grappling with this, and this is kind of a recurring theme in the wake of very high profile suicides like this, where all of a sudden the world is shocked and we can't figure it out, and we're, for a little bit at least, we're a little bit more mindful of just the significance, just the heft, the depth, the sadness, the tragedy that is suicide. And I think for a little bit we take the opportunity to call the people we love, because the fact of the matter is we never know where people are at internally, what their psychological state is, despite outward appearances. That was this disconnect clearly between how great their life looked from the outside, but clearly what inner turmoil they were enduring inside. And I wanted to use the chance, this kind of global national reckoning with these suicides to say, what, it's great that we are talking about ways that we can be like policies and ways to stop suicide. Of course, it's a tragedy. And the fact of the matter is, though, the most effective thing that we can do is to be artisans of the common good, to every single day find ways to make our daily interactions beautiful and meaningful and make them high quality, because those can make the difference in a person's life. We never know where people are at. The people that we talk to, customer service representatives, our Uber drivers, just any stranger we meet, or even our loved ones, we don't know exactly where they're at. Their interior lives are at any given moment, and keeping the eternal perspective in mind, keeping the ever-present threat of or kind of possibility of suicide in mind, keeping the inherent value and the dignity of people around us in mind, that people are worth treating with dignity and respect inherently, that might inform our motivation to take seriously every exchange we have with every stranger, every person we love, and to make it high quality, to make it meaningful, and to make people feel respected and valued. And so I sent this essay that I'd written to an editor at an international outlet, newspaper outlet that I had written for a number of times, and I was devastated when he told me no. I couldn't believe it. It just in my head, it seemed like, why wouldn't you want to take this opportunity to remind people that every single day is an opportunity to prevent suicide? It's not just when a suicide happens that we should be talking about prevention, but that prevention happens every day. And I was devastated, insulted, and I thought, like, why wouldn't you want to take the opportunity to maybe even prevent further suicides by disseminating this reminder to a really broad audience? And I was a little bit discouraged about the just the system of our news cycle. It's often the case that, one day later, everything's old news. The day after something happens, and that discouraged me, and it also seems like good content is often overlooked. I know a lot of the content of the stories that we've been talking about are hopeful and optimistic, but that's not what drives traffic. What drives traffic in our news cycle today is the incendiary and the provocative, which isn't good for the soul, but it gets clicks or even hate clicks, and that's what makes money and drives advertising dollars. So I just kind of had this moment where I was like, what's the point? How can I try and promote good things in the world through writing if no one cares? if this is just the world we live in? And that was kind of a tough period of time for me. Kind of caused me to reevaluate how to the kind of things I like to write about, uplifting, hopeful stories. How do I create a niche for that in the world? And I don't know if I've completely figured out the answer since then, but that experience did remind me that writing for its own sake is good, and writing about stories of uplift and hope and ideas of uplift and hope, those are good for their own sake as well, despite, whether or not an international outlet wants to publish it, that it's good for its own sake. And no writing is ever wasted. And, to exemplify that, just a series of months ago, I ended up repurposing that essay I wrote in the wake of those suicides 2 years ago, and I repurposed it for an essay for USA Today, one of my columns there, that potentially it maybe even had more of an impact because we're now at home and we know that there's a mental health crisis happening, but we know that we're capable of proactively reaching out. We all have a lot more free time. We're not commuting to work. We don't have brimming social schedules in the way that we might have had pre-pandemic. And so looking at that as an opportunity, I took this disappointment and I tried to turn it into an opportunity. And again, not sure. I hope that maybe it still had some sort of impact, even though it wasn't what I originally envisioned. This essay, the place where I didn't envision it ending up where it did end up. So, in summary, write for its own sake. Tell stories for their own sake, and being a storyteller, it's not a thing you do. It's a way you look at the world. It's a disposition. It's a way of interacting with those around us with intentionality and grace, and looking for purpose in our everyday exchanges, big and small, everyday experiences. Looking for similarities between people and differences, and daring to ask why things are the way they are in terms of the way things are around us, and then looking to stories to help us make sense of these things, make sense of the world, make sense of what's going on around us. So, write for its own sake, continue telling stories for their own sake. I have a few practical tips for the revision process for you to consider, both for this class and beyond. One thing that I like to do is print off the document and actually take a pen and paper and go through and line edit, and it's kind of old school, but that can be a really helpful thing. Just something about having it in your hand and the pen in your hand. It just you see things differently. Second, reading your prose aloud to yourself or to someone else. It's amazing. The brain is so incredible that sometimes our brains just fill in the blank. There's a missing word, or sometimes even missing 3 words, but your brain just knows what you've written, knows what you're trying to say, and it'll fill in those blanks for you. And when we read that aloud, we catch those small things that might be the difference between an editor or someone accepting our work or not accepting our work. So reading it aloud is a really useful thing. And if you have a longer piece, like maybe 4 or 5 more paragraphs, it can be useful to do a reverse outline, which is basically reading what you have and summarizing in one sentence every single paragraph, and then like reading each paragraph sequentially and saying, okay, does this flow? Does this make sense? That's kind of a broad kind of way to structural edit to make sure that the story's flowing, the argument's flowing, what you're trying to say is flowing, and everything kind of fits together well. And you don't have broad swaths of text just kind of there. And it's also useful. Like, is every sentence in this paragraph useful? Is every word in this sentence useful to my overall theme? And then is every paragraph in this overall essay useful to the broader vision, the broader theme for the piece of prose? And lastly, it's also always great just to have a set of eyes on something. Someone you can trust. It's a really vulnerable process to share your written work with people, especially if it's about personal subject matter. It's not just putting your work out there, it's putting part of yourself out there. So that can be really vulnerable. So ideally someone you trust. And you can either ask them to line edit, catch typos, missing words, things like that. Or you could just say, look at it for the overall theme. Sometimes I'll say to my husband, please read this. I know it's rough, it's not polished, but just tell me what you think about the big idea, that's just kind of the gist, and help me like refine it at a high level first before going into the smaller level editing. You can feel more attached to text if you spent a lot of time doing rigorous line edits and reading it a dozen times, when sometimes you need to have a little bit of a looseness, a more detachment from it, to be able to cut material and say, you know what, that actually doesn't fit, and maybe that'll fit in a different essay or a different piece of material sometime. So those are some just practical ideas, ways that you can hopefully continue to edit and refine your work and your craft, both for this class and beyond. And I want to talk a little bit about how writing and the practice of revision, they are both examples of kind of working this habit of empathy. And I do use it as a habit because empathy is a choice, and it's something that gets better with use. And why is this the case? Well, first of all, as we've talked about a lot in this course, looking around us and looking for stories in our everyday, or stories that we encounter, stories that people tell us, and proactively looking for stories that tell us about the human experience, that broadens our horizons of just the beauty and diversity of humanity, and it broadens our just tolerance and our appreciation for different people. Have different ways of life, but like we're all grounded in our common humanity, and that's a beautiful thing, and we all use stories to make sense of the world. And also the process of revision and especially self-revision, challenging yourself to think, who is my audience? Not just having sort of detached sympathy with your reader, like, oh, they're over there and I'm here, but like putting yourself in the reader's shoes and saying, how will my reader receive what I'm saying? Will this actually help them? Will this edify their lives? So accepting edits and feedback as well is humbling, and also necessary to build empathy too, recognizing that there's more than one way to look at things, that we each bring our own lens and our own experiences to to what we read and to the table when we have relationships as well, and that those different lenses might take different things away from the text. And so it begins with the revision process and accepting edits and feedback. It begins with the acknowledgement that there's more than one perspective out there than ours alone, more points of view to incorporate. But it also is, the flip side of that is also important to keep in mind, it's our writing. What is our purpose with this? And you can take edits, take, suggested revisions with a grain of salt because of that. People might often mean well when they're offering you feedback, but, so you don't have to take feedback personally, but you might instead, say that's actually not the direction I want to take it in. And I'm not going to incorporate that feedback, and, no harm, no foul. And that's perfectly fine as well. So it definitely can be a balance between incorporating different perspectives and helpful, useful suggestions from those around us, but also keeping in mind our vision, our creative vision, and our voice as well, as we write and refine our craft. Some questions I want to leave you with. How do you think that storytelling can continue to help you in your personal and professional lives? I'd love to hear that from you this coming class. And I want to hear more about how you plan to use, specifically how you plan to use the piece of written work that we've created in this class. And I'd love to hear how I can help you, whether it's placing it or connecting with someone, or just even editing it a little bit more if you'd like a little bit more feedback than what we talked about last week and then the feedback I gave you. And lastly, what have been your favorite parts of the course? What are some great takeaways and insights, and how are you going to leave this class differently than when you got here? I'd love to hear that as well. So please submit your final drafts of your written work to Wednesday around 2, so I can look at them before class. And for our final class, we have a guest speaker who will be sharing with us a fun and surprising story about philanthropy that will be, I think, a hysterically, wonderfully fun high note to end this class on. Just this intersection of philanthropy and storytelling, and the power of humor to just kind of disarm us and connect us with one another. So looking forward to seeing you then.